following program was recorded at the annual CSCMP conference in San Diego. I'm pleased to welcome Managing Editor of SupplyChainBrain, Bob Bowman.
As the saying goes in the world of transportation, the last mile is the hardest. So we're going to find out what are some of the challenges in that final step of delivery to the ultimate customer in my conversation today with Grant Opperman, President and Chief Strategy Officer of D.W. Morgan. Hi, Grant.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the problems that typically occur in the last mile of the supply chain?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. For so long, manufacturing has moved to new locations all over the world. And even today, supply chain, transportation, and logistics are really struggling to catch up with that globalization. We see in our business customers that have an easy time shipping goods, say, from the United States to Asia, to China or Malaysia. But what happens when those goods get to that endpoint of the supply chain, to that last mile? So often, those are the places where the transportation services, the logistics, and the warehousing are being brokered out to local providers. And those are the places where the security, the compliance, the standard operating processes, all of those things that customers really care about begin to erode in that last mile of transportation or logistics.
Well, what are the drivers, so to speak, of some of these, of this happening? I mean, what are the factors behind the reason why it's so difficult these days?
Right. Well, I think part of that is that to this point, the emphasis has not been on that part of the move. A lot of times it's getting the goods in theater, and then, for instance, say you're using a contract manufacturing partner in Penang, Malaysia. You get the goods to Malaysia, and now you just tell your manufacturing partner you find someone who can pick up the goods at the airport and bring them to the factory, or can take finished goods out of the factory to a distribution center. What that means is that so many times the transportation that's being chosen, the warehousing that's being chosen, is being chosen just because it's the local provider that is the most cost-effective, the cheapest provider, or just someone who has a local relationship with that provider. That doesn't necessarily mean that those providers are going to have a set of services that correspond to the things that you as the shipper care about.
Why are we now starting to talk about the last mile?
In all honesty and simplicity, because that's where things are getting messed up. As I say, it's easy to get things now, put them on a jumbo jet and send them anywhere in the world. But in our business, and I know in the business of other companies that we talk to, that last mile of transportation is where clients lose complete visibility to where are the goods. Are they on the way to the factory? Have they arrived? Have they not left the warehouse yet? So there's a technology standpoint to that. They also lose control of the goods. Does the local provider have the same material handling safeguards, the same security procedures, the same damage regulations around their handling of the goods? So these are the places where you can win the war in transportation logistics, or win the battle and yet lose the war in that last piece into the factory or the distribution center, where all of these standards are going by the wayside. And I should mention too, Bob, that it's not just the last mile, it's also the first mile sometimes coming out of the factories and the distribution centers as well, where those are going now from a completed factory or distribution center out to the customer. And people are thinking about how do I deliver it to the customer, but they're not thinking about how do I get it to the point where I can deliver it to the customer.
So you say a lot of these companies have relied on local in-country services in order to effect the last mile delivery. What needs to change in order to improve the picture?
Well, I think the first thing is just realization. You know, we have seen, and we're still in the middle of, I think, a tremendous education that needs to be done by the industry. A lot of times in the past, these services have just been bundled in to a contract manufacturing agreement or a distribution agreement. And in essence, they're invisible to the person who's contracting for them. I've just told my contract manufacturer, provide me with manufactured goods that are delivered to this point. And I don't know really how they're moving or when they're moving or what's going on behind that. So the first thing that needs to happen is education. Let's become more aware of that. And then the second thing is to put a lot more rigor around a standardized set of processes and management for these kinds of movements, making sure that whether that last or first mile is in Texas or Mexico or Malaysia or Brazil or wherever it is, that it's handled in the same way from a management standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, from an SOP standpoint, and from a technology standpoint.
Can you talk about some of the other factors that affect this, like information, security, visibility, compliance? Those are all part of the issue as well, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to tell a story about technology. Years ago, I went to Chennai, India, which is a large manufacturing distribution port on the southeast seaboard of India. And I spoke with a partner in the region, said, you know, what GPS systems do you use here? And he said, we don't really have GPS systems here in India. I said, well, why is that? You know, you still have the same satellites up in the sky that are visible to you. Why wouldn't you have them? He said, well, here in Chennai, all of the drivers get their assignment to take freight from one place to another place, and then they'll have unofficial backhauls on the way back to their starting point, and they don't want to be tracked because now all of that additional income is going to be taken out of their pocket. Well, at a certain point, as an industry, we need to grow up, realize that, and address it. I don't know for all sectors, if you're shipping clothing or bananas, maybe you can put up with that kind of invisibility and variability in the supply chain. But in the areas where we work and the companies that we work with, it's of vital importance to be able to see and manage goods all the time. So we have to find technologies and processes to allow us to control those goods, even when they're coming out of a factory in Chennai.
Do the solutions have to be geographic and country specific, or are there some uniform and standardized approaches that can be adopted, that can be applied across global supply chains?
Well, I think you just put your finger on a key part of this. So often, customers will reach for a solution that's very regional, very specific in nature. And that really doesn't scale. What happens now if you're manufacturing in a dozen places or 15 places? What happens if you're distributing to multiple contents? You end up with dozens and hundreds of relationships, vendors to manage, integrations, SOPs. So you need to look for those standard systems that you're talking about, Bob. We've found, and I know we're not the only ones, but we've found that there are standardized technologies that you can use so that you don't have to figure out what's the GPS system in Guadalajara. Who can I find instead who can give me visibility as a GPS system in all theaters at one time? We, as an example, we use the iPhone for our field service personnel to enter information about shipments in the field. And to me, that was a signal moment in terms of mobile computing and applications, regardless of who ends up winning the war, BlackBerry, Windows, whatever that is in the end, because that was the first time that I had a technology company come to me and say, we've gone to every country and we've already figured out the deals with the local providers and the technology, and just go down to the store, buy our phone, put your application on it, and it'll work, regardless of where you're trying to work. And those are the kinds of solutions, whether you're talking about mobile phones, satellite GPS reporting, or what have you. Those are the solutions that I think as an industry we need to be searching for, so that we have that single point of integration that we can grab onto and manage our stuff in the same way everywhere.
Extremely valuable advice. Thank you so much, Grant.
Thank you very much for having me.
Grant Opperman of D.W. Morgan has shared with us his insights into the world of last mile delivery. Thank you very much for watching.